Hello again, everybody. This is Derek, and I'm coming back at you with another Wargaming in Miniature video. In today's video, we're going to continue on with our O Group Boot Camp. And in the last video, we talked about actions and how to pay for your actions using orders. Now, in this video, we're going to be talking about movement rates, how far your figures can move, how to conduct movement. But we're also going to be talking about terrain. Terrain will affect your movement. Because movement is chapter 9 and terrain is chapter 10, we're going to do them in order. So if something refers to terrain, then what we will do is hold off on explaining that until chapter 10. All right, so let's dig into movement. Movement in O Group reflects the uncertain environment of a battlefield. Units may be given orders to advance, but how far would they actually move is not in the hands of the player. It's not even in the hands of the battalion headquarters or even the company commanders, but it's down to the local officers and NCOs. This aspect of command and control is represented by a random element through a 2-6 roll. Thus, your units may advance rapidly towards objectives, or they may simply crawl forwards, slowed down by the presence of the enemy, or threat presented by the unseen enemy. Yeah, so you have a variable movement rate, and this simulates the individual officers deciding how fast their units can move. It also might indicate that just because we're sitting on a flat 4x6 table with a blanket on it doesn't mean that there might be bushes and brambles in this area, or there might be divots in the ground, or there might be rocks, or it might be slippery, or whatever. So we can't see that, and everything can't be modeled. Okay, general rule of movement. Movement distance is determined by a 2-6 roll, and some vehicles gain an additional fixed move as well. The total dice score is simply converted into inches, so you may roll 2-6 and score a 7. The unit may move 7 inches. Average and fast armored fighting vehicles also have additional fixed movement. Average is +2 and fast is +4. So slow AFVs get no plus. No minus as well. Okay, the movement procedure. Order a move action. A unit must first receive an action that permits movement. Next, determine the tactical bound. When a unit receives a move action, the player must state where the platoon or section intends to move to. For example, to a hedgerow, a wall, a fence, wire, whatever. If moving down a road or track, then this isn't necessary. On reaching the stated tactical bound, the unit halts. Let's say I wanted this unit to move to this fence, but I rolled boxcars. So he gets to move 12 inches. He won't. He will just stop at that fence. Now, this is a tool for the player to keep his units moving in a steady pace. If you want, you can just say, I want this unit to move as far as I can, and then he'll move as far as he can. AFV platoons. One section with a radio-equipped AFV may remain stationary while the other moves. Players must specify beforehand which section is moving and which is not. Individual AFVs from a radio-equipped platoon may move in different directions. Each must be given its own tactical bound. AFVs without radios, early war tanks, must all move in the same direction and maintain the same facing. Basically, they move kind of like an infantry platoon. Interpenetration. Infantry, and this is unique to infantry, may move through all other units. Tanks and guns may move through infantry, but they cannot pass through or over other tanks and guns. So tanks and guns, think of them like roadblocks. They can move through the infantry. Like if I needed to move this tank through this infantry, I could do that. If I needed to move this gun through this vehicle, I could not do it. Minimum close distance. Units cannot approach to within 1 inch of an enemy unit unless assaulting them. Units other than combat patrols can move into contact with enemy combat patrols to remove them without the need for an assault. Just touch them and kill them. A combat patrol may not move within 8 inches, 10 if large, of large figures that is, of any enemy unit or combat patrol. So combat patrols have this zone of control around them, or I should say a zone of fear around them, where they will not move within 8 inches of the enemy. They move up and they stop, measure out 8 inches, and they will stop there. A good thing about that is if you've got an opponent with an enemy combat patrol and you're sitting at 8 inches from this combat patrol, well, now this combat patrol cannot advance because he's within 8 inches of you. He can only fall back. So you can move up and pin other combat patrols knowing they have an 8-inch fear zone, but be aware that the same is being done to yourself. Okay, moving steady, hesitant, and suppressed units. Steady units with 1 or no shock, so let's see, this platoon has 1 shock, may move normally without restriction. Hesitant units with 2 shock makes them hesitant. Not necessarily a hesitant company, because that affects your entire company, but a unit with 2 shock also becomes hesitant, cannot move closer to the enemy units in their line of sight, but otherwise may move. So he can move like this way because he sees these guys, or if everybody over here was behind this bocage, he could move up because he wouldn't see the enemy. Suppressed units may not move. That's somebody with 3 shock. Unless issued a successful rally or react withdraw. So I can do a react withdraw, which we know does 2d6 to the rear, or a rally where if you succeed, I could move and fire, or if I fail, I can move or fire. But you cannot move closer to the enemy, because suppressed is worse than hesitant, so it doesn't specifically say that, but it implies that suppressed is not moving closer to the enemy. Okay, movement rates. This is pretty standard across the board. So, like, your infantry and my infantry are going to move the same. I don't have, like, gold medalist track stars, and you don't have, like, Special Olympics guys. Everybody moves the same. But depending on their equipment or their troop class, vehicles, or whatever, that will adjust the movement. And you'll need the quick reference. So, here we go. Movement rates. Company commanders. You have a company commander. He'll move 3d6. Rapid move. And we'll be talking about all the rapid moves and stuff like that. Because infantry can also do a rapid move, but company commanders always do 3d6. Which means they don't shoot, because FOs and company commanders can't shoot, so why not always rapid move? Infantry, they move 2d6. That's basically the basics. Heavy weapons, like medium machine guns, light mortars, those get 2d6, just like infantry. Fast armored fighting vehicles and reconnaissance, like this bad boy, right? He gets the +4 because he's fast AFE. We already talked about that. Average AFE, that would be like Panzer IV, Shermans. They get 2d6 +2. Slow AFEs, 2d6. We already went over that. Cavalry. Yes, there are horse units in some armies. Mounted cavalry, think of it like an average AFE. They get 2d6 +2. Trucks. They are not as fast. They move 2d6. Combat patrols, 2d6. Infantry dismount and move. So if you got infantry in this half track and he's going to dismount, he can dismount. He rolls 2 dice, but only uses the highest score. Vehicles in rough terrain. Let's say this field here is considered rough. He would roll 2 dice and use the single highest score. That's all vehicles. Reversing. Let's say you've got a tank here. He's getting shot at from the front. He wants to move back, but he doesn't want to turn because then he would present his rear to the enemy. He wants to back up. So he's reversing. He rolls 2 dice and uses the single higher score. So far, so good. It's pretty much straightforward. Reconnaissance reversing. They roll 2 dice. They don't get the +4, but they do get the whole 2 dice. Light gun manhandle. So a light gun is anything that is 70 millimeters or less, not being towed. He's going to have to manhandle it. They're lifting up the trail and they're rolling it on its wheels. They roll 2 dice and they used the highest die. Heavy gun manhandle. Guess what? That is 75 millimeter or larger, like a Pac 40. Or if you actually had like a 105 on the table, it would roll 2 dice, but it would use the lowest die. A regroup move is 2 dice for all units, and a retreat, which is a little bit worse than a withdraw, a retreat is 3 dice, and you use all the dice. Okay, I think you can remember that after one read, but if not, it's on the quick reference chart. Everything moves 2 dice, except for a couple of things. Company commander and everything retreating. There is some things with pluses, like armored fighting vehicles, and there are some things that use the higher score or the lower score, but other than that, it's pretty much always 2 dice. So a heavy weapon is considered a medium machine gun, 60mm mortar, anti-tank sections. Heavy machine guns are treated as light guns. You have to manhandle a heavy machine gun. Fast AFVs include the M18 Hellcat, the M5 Stuart, the Tetrarch, a Cromwell, the BT-7, the Lukes, all armored cars, Jeeps or similar vehicles, and they move 2 dice 6 and add 4. Average includes the vast majority of light to late battle AFVs, from Panzer IIs to Panthers, from Shermans to T-34s. It also includes all carriers and half-tracks. They move 2 dice and add +2. Slow AFVs. These include the underpowered AFVs like heavy or super heavy AFVs, except for the Panther. That's considered average. So example would be Tiger 1 and 2, the Elephant, the Churchill, the Matilda, Char B, Renault, Hotchkiss, KV2, T-34, IS-2. Also include all tankettes and mine-clearing AFVs. They just move 2 dice. Mounted cavalry applies in open terrain. In rough terrain, or when dismounted, they move as infantry. Trucks. When off-road, trucks move a total of 2 dice. When on-road, they move a total of 3 dice. And add an extra 4. So they are super fast. Combat patrols. They move 2 dice. Vehicles in rough terrain. All vehicles use 2 dice and take the higher score. Even a truck. The lower dice score and the additional fixed move rate is ignored. For example, if a player rolls 2 dice 6 and scores a 2 and a 5, he moves 5. The score of 2 is ignored. Okay, we got that. Reversing. Reconnaissance AFVs reverse 2 dice 6. All other vehicles take the highest score. Manhandling. All guns can be manhandled into a new position and fire, or unlimber and fire. Light guns roll 2 dice and take the single higher score, and heavy guns take the single lower score. Okay, now this is something unusual. It says heavy guns on a cruciform and similar may not be manhandled. For example, the German 88 or the US 90. Now it says heavy guns on a cruciform, so that would not apply to the Bofors. Regroup move. All units move 2 dice. Guns that manhandle still use the single higher die. Retreat. Units retreat using 3 dice, adding all the dice, even in rough terrain. I don't even care. Okay, rapid move. So what's special about that? The rapid 3 dice 6 move option permits the player to sacrifice any firing to potentially move further. In open terrain, roll 3 dice and use the 2 highest scores as the move in inches. And you may make one attempt to re-roll all initial scores of 1. Important. Units that fire and use the reconnaissance action or are vehicles in rough cannot use rapid move. So you can't rapid move and shoot or use the reconnaissance action. or you can't rapid move through rough terrain. Slow AFVs and trucks cannot use rapid move off-road. Combat patrols, medium machine guns, heavy machine guns, and manhandled guns cannot use rapid move. So combat patrols are sneaking around all the time. They don't ever use the balls to the wall 3 dice. But either way, you're still only taking the 2 highest and re-rolling ones one time. Okay, rapid move on a road. Vehicles and mounted cavalry using rapid move on a road count all 3 dice 6. For instance, a Sherman tank section would roll 3 dice 6 plus 2 on a score of 5, 4, and 3. That would be 9, 10, 11, 12. It would be 12 plus 2, so a total of 14 inches. Trucks are classified as fast when on a road. Trucks must remain on the road for the full movement to gain the road bonus. Okay, that's all units, not just trucks. It just says units must remain. Restriction. If a unit wishes to move and fire, it can only use the standard 2d6 move, even if on a road. All right, reserves. The action is classed as a rapid move using the total of all dice scores for movement. So use all 3 dice 6 scores as your move if in the open. Or if on a road, roll 4 dice 6 and use all scores. Basically, it just gives you an extra d6. Rapid move. Okay. Transporting infantry. 2 model transports can carry a platoon of up to 5 sections. These transports act as a single platoon. Using the infantry command radius of 2 inches. Single sections can be carried by 1 transport. An AFV section may carry 2 infantry sections as tank riders. Only Russian submachine gun troops may use this tactic. Passengers do not require separate orders until they are dismounted, which is the next paragraph. Infantry mounting and dismounting from transports. Infantry, tank riders, heavy weapons, motorcycles, and cavalry may embus or mount transports and dismount as a free action. Infantry must be within 1 inch of transports to embus. Transports can take a full move and then embus infantry, or embus infantry and then take a full move. Imagine this truck right there, and they're within 1 inch of this truck. The truck has not received an order. They decide to embus. That is a free action. Does not cost them anything to do that. And then you can issue an order to the transports, giving them a full move, flying down the road. Infantry cannot embus and dismount under the same action. So you either load or unload. You can't do both. So if they started loaded, I can fly using the truck movement, and then I can dismount using my free action. After dismounting, infantry can move 2d6, taking the highest score, but cannot fire. Before or after dismounting infantry, transports may provide covering fire. If they do, they can't use rapid move. Okay, and you can only do covering fire if they have a weapon on them or something. When infantry dismount, their transports are removed from play in the following regroup phase. So you don't leave half tracks and trucks, jeeps, or whatever, carriers. You don't leave them on the table. They all get removed. They run back to the rear with the gear. Germans keep their platoon commander half tracks in play. German platoon command half tracks usually have like 75 millimeter guns on them, or 37 millimeter gun, like on a Dash 10 or something. So you can still use its weapon. I would think that half tracks would stay on the table because, they're a fighting platform, and you may wish to mount or dismount them. So I don't know how that rule really... I'm not sure if I like that rule, to be honest. Limbering and unlimbering guns. Light guns, up to 70 caliber, can limber up or unlimber for free. Heavy guns, 75 or larger, require all toe movement to limber up or unlimber. So the truck would have to be given an order for the heavy artillery to load up on it, and they can't move because it takes their entire move. To limber up, the toe must be within 1 inch of the gun model. After unlimbering, guns may fire. Limbering and unlimbering. Okay, so I give this unit an order to unlimber. It uses up the entire truck movement. I place this gun somewhere within 1 inch of the truck, and then I can, which was basically that's movement, and now I can fire with it. Limbering and unlimbering is classed as movement. Guns cannot limber and unlimber in the same action. Guns pivoting and fire may pivot up to 180 degrees on the spot, but incur the negative because they're moving. There is no movement penalty when towing. So you don't get a minus, it doesn't slow you down to tow. AFVs, turning turrets and pivoting. All turreted tanks may turn their turrets through a 360 degree. Turning a turret is not classified as actual movement. Tank destroyers may pivot up to 180 degrees on the spot. If firing, apply a negative for moving modifiers, as a pivoting AFE is classed as movement, and AFEs and guns cannot turn turrets or pivot when using a react or opportunity fire. So it's kind of important to identify where your gun is facing, and there's an arc of fire. We'll get into the shooting, but there's an arc of fire, and if the react is somewhere else, you can't turn the turret and react. Deploying on a combat patrol. This costs the unit's full movement allowance. Moving fire is still permitted. Deploying on a combat patrol incurs a -2 firepower penalty for infantry, or -3 for poor training or lack of light machine guns. All right, let's jump and talk about Chapter 10, which is terrain. This is pretty self-evident, but we are going to talk about it. Terrain is important when playing O-Group. The vast majority of World War II battlefields had numerous and varied terrain features. When laying out your terrain, please put down as many terrain features as you can across the table, from shallow rises, mounds, berms, low ridges, right up to the normal hills and ridges. Include crop fields that provide cover for infantry, either enclosed with hedges or open, as well as roads with steep sides and banks, and of course the usual woods and orchards. Once the terrain is laid out, Ensure that both players know exactly what terrain feature represents what, and if they impact line of sight, especially crest lines. So basically they're saying, cram your table full of terrain. Okay, terrain is classified into 4 distinct types for game purposes. Roads, okay. Open terrain, okay. Rough terrain, gotcha. And impassable terrain. Okay, roads. All properly surfaced roads and any untreated roads tracks in the summer. Movement effect. When vehicles use a rapid move on a road, use all 3 dice scores combined if the entire move is spent on the road. Infantry gain no benefit. And for combat, it's classed as open terrain. Okay, open terrain includes open land, fields, steppe, firm desert, tracks and paths, and orchards, etc. Movement effect, none. Units adopt the open movement rate when on that terrain type. Combat effect, none. Spotting dice is applied if firing through orchards. Alright, rough terrain. Rough terrain includes woods, streams, steep hills, rocky terrain, banks, rubble areas, craters, wet rain-sodden ground, bocage hedgerows, etc. Movement. Infantry, no effect. Infantry treat rough terrain as open terrain for movement. Vehicles, this is different. All vehicles adopt the rough terrain move rate for as long as the unit is moving in such terrain. All vehicles use 2 dice and take the single higher score as their movement. The lower die is ignored. Any fixed movement is also ignored, like a plus for a fast tank. Vehicles moving in both open and rough, because you got to split it, right? Player has 2 choices. Use either the rapid or open movement rates and halt at the terrain edge. The unit may enter the terrain piece in their next action using the rough terrain movement rates, or use the rough terrain movement rate for their entire move and enter and leave the terrain. Okay, let's talk silliness. Pretend this is rough. This vehicle, normally cross country, I'm rolling 2 dice, but in the rough, I'm only rolling 2 dice and taking the highest one. So I decide I'm going to roll 2 dice and stop. So I roll my dice, I only roll a 3, I move 3, and I still haven't reached it. But let's say I rolled something a little bit better. I would be forced to stop because I chose to roll 2 dice. Now let's say I'm there and I say I'm going to gamble and think that I want to get a little bit further. So I'm going to roll 2 dice and take the highest one. Oh, look at that. 6. So I can move the full 6 inches because I chose to roll the rough terrain movement. Bogged down vehicles in rough terrain. Any double score rolled on 2 dice 6 movement will result in one vehicle section bogged down. For example, if you rolled a double 6, then one of your platoon's sections has bogged down. So you just mark him with a little bogged down, like he's getting stuck in the mud. Any score of double 1 will see the platoon bogged down. So like if I was moving a platoon of half-tracks through there, the entire thing would be bogged down. A bogged down AFV section halts immediately if in or as soon as it enters rough terrain. Okay, so I would be bogged down as soon as I enter. I don't know, maybe it should be there. Rough terrain is marked as bogged and cannot move again until freed from this issue in a future move action. A bogged down truck is abandoned and classed as a wreck. Yikes. To debog, issue a move action, then take a troop rating rally roll. If this is passed, the section is freed and may move as normal. So you can move the same turn that you debog. Okay, crossing a bocage. Okay, this is a bocage. Tanks with a Cullen type device cross as normal rough terrain. Tanks without the Cullen hedgerow device must roll 3 dice and take the lowest score. If a double is rolled, they bog down belly up. They take 1 shock if fired on, and shots from the frontal armor will be considered flank shot. Oh goodness. So if I had a tank trying to cross the bocage and I fail the roll, or I should say if I roll doubles, I get stuck belly up so that you can hit me in the underbelly. Infantry cross 2 dice 6 and take the lowest score. Okay. Vehicles moving through a built-up area. All vehicles moving via road through an enemy-held or contested built-up area treat the road as rough terrain. So as soon as, this is a minefield, let's move that out of the way. As soon as this tank, if that's enemy occupied, as soon as I get to there, I'm considered entering rough terrain. And this is all considered rough until I get to there, and then I can continue. Basically, it's saying that they might have put roadblocks or rubble in the road in this area, so it's considered rough. This takes into account that many town and village streets in battle situations were either rubble-strewn or cratered or both. Combat effect. Rough terrain is normally classed as cover for infantry or guns. Rough terrain that is higher, such as bocage, will also provide cover for armored fighting vehicles. The spotting die is applied if firing into woods, bocage, etc. I do want to make a point that in the Normandy book, bocage is actually expanded upon and clarified. Impassable terrain. That's why I pulled out this lake. It can be terrain that is impassable to just vehicles. So like if it's a shallow lake, infantry treat this as rough, or is impassable to both infantry and vehicles. So remember, if they're treating it as rough, there's no effect on movement for infantry, but they do get cover in rough. Impassable to both infantry and vehicles, maybe it's really deep. This can include dense woods, like the trees are so close you can't move through there, rivers, cliffs, swamps, etc. Buildings and built-up area sectors are considered impassable terrain to AFVs and other vehicles. They can only pass through built-up sectors via roads. Movement effect, no units may enter this terrain type, and combat effect, dependent upon terrain type. Okay, so what they're saying is the vehicles can't go into impassable terrain, so if you can't go in, you can't get a benefit for terrain features, and infantry treated as rough if it's maybe it's a dense woods and only infantry can move through it, but they would consider it rough. Okay, terrain definitions. Elevated terrain. Elevated terrain enables units to fire at their increased elevated ranges. So we haven't got to combat yet, but everybody has a normal shooting range, but they also have what's called an elevated range, and different weapon systems fire different ranges if they're elevated. Having an improved position means you can see further and engage targets at longer distances. However, they can see you. Players should always ensure they have an assortment of elevated terrain features on the table. For ease of play, if a unit is on any part of the raised terrain, it is considered to be elevated, and this includes being automatically considered on the second or upper stories of buildings. Important. Units on the ground level may also target elevated enemy units at elevated ranges. So if there's an elevation difference, you both get the elevated ranges. Important. Elevated terrain is considered to be any and all higher ground, such as hills and ridges, low hills, the upper stories of buildings, and includes embankments such as a slight rise or undulation. So if you have just a slight rise, like maybe even a dike or an elevated rail, you would be considered elevated. Okay, cover. Cover includes crop fields, shell craters, shallow trenches, shell scrapes, hedges, bocage hedges, walls, rough ground, orchards, woods, and vehicle wrecks. Cover mainly represents the difficulty of actually acquiring targets in cover rather than protective, which was generally minimal. Cover is anything that would basically disguise or hide your presence. When I was in the Army, we would call that concealment. Cover would be something that would stop a bullet, and concealment would be something that would stop line of sight. But in this game, cover counts both. When firing at any target in this type of cover, use the spotting die to determine if the target is spotted or obscured. Okay, so when you shoot, normally you don't worry about it, but if the target is obscured or in an obscured terrain, you roll a die to see if you can see them. It doesn't stop you from shooting them. It doesn't stop you from hitting them. It just determines what their saving throw is going to be, and that'll be in combat. AFV wrecks are classed as cover and block line of sight beyond 1 inch, and small arms fire applies a -1 die modifier. Line of sight into cover. The maximum line of sight into dense cover, such as woods or buildings, is 1 inch. Units beyond this cannot be seen. Visibility out of cover is unaffected as long as any unit inside is within 1 inch of the edge of the cover. If opposing units are within the same dense cover terrain feature, units are spotted within 6 inches of each other. Less dense cover, such as orchards or crop fields, do not block line of sight. They do apply a obscure die. It doesn't actually stop the line of sight. Hold down. Upon reaching a potential hold down position, all tanks are assumed to automatically attempt to go hold down. Therefore, when firing at any potential hold down AFE target, always apply the spotting die, as hold down is treated as being in cover. If spotted, the hold down position was poor or simply not achieved. If the target is obscured, the hold down position was successfully achieved. So you roll a die to see if you can see past the hold down. Hold down does not apply to any Russian tanks or any tank destroyers. That's with casemate guns like a Stug or a Hetzer, due to gun position or limited depression capability. So you don't have to state this or mark his tanks as hold down. It's assumed that as soon as a tank moves into a crest line or embankment, they automatically attempt to go hold down. Okay, dug in. For dug in AFEs, the spotting die and a -1 to hit modifier are applied. Hasty defense is thrown up, or pits dug out of the cover a gun or heavy weapon require a spotting die and a -1d6 firepower modifier. Trenches are defined as properly constructed. Only infantry can man slit trenches. Targets in trenches incur a -2 die modifier to the fire, and of course also the spotting die. Think of it like heavy cover instead of light cover. Well-prepared earth or log defenses, providing solid cover and overhead protection, may not contain very large or tall guns such as the 88, but these may be placed in a gun pit. All right, this next section is built-up areas, towns basically. These or farms. These include stone buildings, brick houses, factories, churches. Targets in buildings incur a -2d6 modifier to the firer, and also requires a spotting die. Now, wooden buildings would only incur a -1d6 modifier and the spotting die. The sector. A built-up sector represents a group of buildings or houses, a factory or a farm. Depending on the size of your building models, These could represent one or more built-up areas. So like if you have this big, huge Stalingrad factory, you might count that as more than one built-up area. You must clearly distinguish separate built-up area sectors at the beginning of the game. A small farm would be one built-up area sector, a large farm 2, and a small village 2 or 3. Occupying built-up areas. As soon as an infantry reach an unoccupied built-up area, they may form a garrison as a bonus move. Place the figures in or around the model as best you can and state which side of the built-up area they are manning, which can include a corner. Note, infantry command radius still applies within a built-up area sector. For ease of play, an occupying unit is automatically considered on the upper stories and therefore elevated. This is the default position, unless players intentionally split up the built-up area into separate upper and lower floors. Again, like if it's a factory and there's like a big upper area and a lower like rubble area, you have to decide how you want to deal with it. The maximum garrison of one built-up area sector is one infantry platoon and attachment and one other section, such as a separately firing medium machine gun, a company command, etc. Company commanders and FOs may also join a garrison and ignore the capacity. Restrictions. AFVs and guns cannot be placed inside buildings, but may be placed in a yard or garden. Players should clearly define where vehicles may pass through a built-up area sector via a road or alleyway, or if at all. So like when I plan to do my built-up areas, which I haven't completed them yet, but I do plan to have a couple of buildings representing the built-up area and maybe a wall around it, and there's going to be like an entrance doorway that leads into a little courtyard or something. It's going to be clearly defined. Firing out of a built-up area. Position the platoon in a defensive position in or around the model and state the arc of fire. Players may use an arc marker to distinguish the arcs are covered. Note, players do not need to be concerned with individual model doorways or windows. Assume each built-up sector has sufficient openings to permit fire from any side, because it represents more than just one building. Close combat in built-up areas. The attacking unit needs to be within 1 inch of the enemy occupied built-up area to initiate close combat. Infantry in built-up areas cannot be flanked in close combat. Defending units automatically turn to face the attackers, but lose the chance to opportunity fire when flanked. Okay, so if I've got a platoon, not a combat patrol, but let's say I got a platoon in this built-up area and it's facing to the front like this. If I was to close assault it from the front, I could use my opportunity fire to shoot at these guys because it's in arc and it's in line of sight. But if I was to assault the built-up area from this side, they would not get the opportunity fire, but they would still turn to fight me. Okay, field defenses. These consist of wire entanglements, minefields, bunkers, stuff like that. Okay, wire entanglements. Each wire entanglement should be 1x4. Okay, this is 1/72nd scale wire entanglement. It should be 4 inches and not 6. Wire may not be deployed on roads or in built-up areas. Only fully tracked light or heavier AFVs may cross wire. AFVs treat crossing barbed wire as entering rough terrain No other units, including weak AFEs, may cross wire, except for infantry engineers. AFEs destroy a wire entanglement that they cross, and it is removed. All assault engineers and infantry equipped with wire clearance equipment may attempt to clear the wire. On arrival at the wire, the units halt and may attempt to clear the wire next turn. To clear the wire, the unit is given a standard fire and move and takes a troop rating rally roll. If successful, it removes that wire strip from play, and the unit may then move. The fire action is clearing the wire. If the troop rating roll is failed, the wire remains intact, and suppressed units cannot clear wire. Now, minefields. Also, that needs to be a 4x4. Minefields may not be deployed on roads or in built-up areas. No units may enter minefields except mine clearance AFEs. Mine clearance AFEs equipped with rollers or flails can clear mines. These AFEs cross minefields as rough terrain. They leave a permanent path as wide as the vehicle clearing the minefield. They receive no mine damage from mine clearance. Okay, so they just have to move through it at the rough speed. Hasty mines. Hasty mines represent limited, hidden mined areas and cover 4x1. Hasty mines are not placed on the table. The defending player notes down where they are. Mines on the north road at the village edge, or mines immediately in front of bunker A. When an enemy unit enters a hasty mined area, this is declared by the defending player, who rolls to ascertain the amount of shock taken by the enemy. Roll 5 dice. For each score of 4 or more results in a point of shock. Hasty mines only attack once and are removed. Dead ground. All hills and ridges are considered higher than trees and built-up areas. Low rises and hillocks are considered the same height as trees and built-up areas. So that implies that trees are the same height as built-up areas. Troops behind and within 6 inches of built-up areas or woods are considered in dead ground. So if you're on a hill and you're looking over a patch of trees, you can't see anything on the far side of the trees if they're within 6 inches. Okay. All right. Well, that was movement and terrain. And in the next video, we'll be talking about spotting, direct fire, which is basically the general rules of firing, line of sight, arcs, ranges. We might even get into infantry fire and HE fire. And then the following video might be anti-tank fire. And that's all direct fire. Just depends on how long the videos are. All right, well, thank you for coming out and watching this video. Stay tuned as I upload other videos, and I'll catch you in the next one.